Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14th of 1946 on a council estate in the English city of Nottingham. His parents were both devout Methodist Christians, while his father earned a living driving trucks for various shipping companies. In school, Harold proved himself a promising athlete, but when he was just 17 years old, he received some terrible, life-changing news. His mother had cancer, and it was terminal. Over the next several months, as his mother entered the final stages of her battle with the disease, a young Harold would watch as her doctors gave her morphine to ease her pain. It was the only thing that gave her any relief, and she remained in an almost serene and blissful state until her eventual death on June 21st of 1963. It's very possible this experience influenced Harold's choice of undergraduate subject, as he went on to study medicine at the University of Leeds before graduating in 1970. But it's possible that the experience also influenced him to make another choice, much later in life, that made his name a synonym for a terrifying variety of medical malpractice. In 1974, Dr. Shipman found employment as a general practitioner in Todmorden, a small town around 17 miles northeast of Manchester. But the following year, he was caught up in his first and much lesser-known scandal. It was discovered that Shipman had been forging medical prescriptions for the drug pethidine, and that all evidence suggested that it was for personal use. Pethidine is an opioid pain relief medicine that was once widely used, but has since been superseded by newer and safer options. Yet, like any opioid-based painkiller, overconsumption can lead to tantalizing highs, as well as astonishing lows. It makes for grim consideration that one of Shipman's motives for taking the drug was to experience the same sensation his mother had, one of being comfortably numb and at complete peace. Yet when his drug abuse was discovered, it almost ended his career. After pleading his case to the medical tribunal tasked with deciding his punishment, Shipman was shown an unusual amount of mercy. Instead of being prosecuted, or at the very minimum, barred from practicing medicine, Dr. Shipman was given mandatory counseling, fined £600, and then allowed to continue on his way. In 1977, he moved to Hyde, a much larger town on the outskirts of Manchester, and resumed practicing medicine at the town's Donnybrook Medical Center. By 1993, Dr. Shipman had saved up enough money to open his very own doctor's surgery, and did so at number 21 Market Street on Hyde's main thoroughfare. As you can imagine, being one of Hyde's only local doctors made Shipman a revered member of the community, and the vast majority of his patients spoke only of his gentle demeanor and calming disposition. But as the years went by, certain members of the community began to notice a disturbing pattern regarding the health of Dr. Shipman's patients. In March of 1998, Southern Manchester's top coroner received a call from a Dr. Linda Reynolds, who was employed at a medical practice just across the street from the one Dr. Shipman owned. She told the coroner that she'd noticed an unusually high death rate among Dr. Shipman's patients, specifically among elderly women. Just over a month later, Greater Manchester Police questioned Dr. Shipman in connection with the deaths, but found nothing suspicious regarding his behavior. To those who knew him, Dr. Shipman was nothing short of an angel, a man who took the time to visit his patients at home to ensure the highest quality of both care and comfort. He soothed the pain of dozens of kind-hearted elderly women, and he had a plethora of character witnesses on hand to testify to that. After a lengthy investigation, the charges against Shipman were dropped and he was free to continue practicing medicine. But Linda Reynolds wasn't the only person to notice unusual circumstances surrounding the death of Dr. Shipman's patients. On June 24th of 1998, the former mayor of Hyde, Kathleen Grundy, was found dead in her home. She appeared to have passed away peacefully in her sleep, and at first, there was nothing remotely suspicious about her death. Yet when her daughter, Angela, read over her mother's last will and testament, she was stunned. Her mother, with whom she'd shared a very close relationship with over the years, had failed to leave her a single penny, whereas Dr. Shipman had been bequeathed the lump sum of £386,000. Despite his brush with scandal, Dr. Shipman was still a much-loved member of the community by that point. But Kathleen Grundy didn't love her doctor more than she loved her own daughter, so Angela was deeply and immediately suspicious. So, on the advice of a friend, Angela approached Greater Manchester Police and asked them to investigate. Having already questioned Dr. Shipman on suspicion of medical malpractice, the police moved quickly to authorize the exhumation of Kathleen Grundy's body. Then, following a lengthy analysis, medical examiners made a shocking discovery. Kathleen's corpse contained trace amounts of diamorphine, more commonly known as heroin. When Shipman was asked about this, he claimed Kathleen had been a secret addict for most of her life, and showed them a digital copy of her medical records which showed that that was the case. However, upon closer analysis, one of the officers noticed something glaringly inconsistent regarding the records. Most of the entries had first been composed long before Kathleen passed away, but many of them appeared to have been edited in the days following her death. Armed with clear evidence of Shipman's foul play, he was arrested under suspicion of murder on September 7th of 1998. When the police searched his address, they recovered a typewriter, and after careful analysis, determined that it had been used to forge Kathleen Grundy's will. Once that was clear, they had just about all the evidence they needed to prove Shipman was guilty in a court of law. The only question was, how many other women had he killed? In the months leading up to his trial, police trawled through Shipman's patient records, isolating any who appeared to have suddenly passed away. At the very minimum, there were 15 cases in which Shipman was the last person to see his patient alive, and in each of those cases, traces of diamorphine were present in the deceased's remains. But as the investigation continued, investigators made a horrifying discovery. By the time police officers had finished analyzing Shipman's patient records, they had their 15 so-called sample cases, but the real number of victims was anywhere between 20 and 150. When Dr. Harold Shipman's trial began on October 5th of 1999, police had chosen to focus exclusively on their 15 definite victims, whose cause of death were lethal injections of diamorphine between the years of 1995 and 1998. The court heard how police discovered a very distinct pattern of perfectly healthy patients dying suddenly while under Dr. Shipman's care, and how he'd cover his tracks by falsifying their medical records following their demise. It was an airtight case, and on January 31st of the year 2000, Shipman was found guilty on all 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was given a whole life tariff, meaning that he'll spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. Shipman protested his innocence throughout the trial and disputed the legitimacy of the scientific evidence brought forth by the prosecution. Shipman's wife, Primrose, also professed her belief that her husband was innocent, even following the unanimous convictions. But as time went by, her opinion of her husband began to change. During the summer of 2002, a senior West Yorkshire police detective announced the results of an 18-month inquiry into the murders of Dr. Harold Shipman. Investigators had originally suspected him of murdering 1 elderly woman for monetary gain. Then it was 5 elderly women, then 10, then 20. Prior to his trial, that number had ballooned to approximately 150. But Detective Chris Gregg declared that following an intensive investigation, the number of victims was, at the very least, 218. The inquiry also concluded that Shipman stole around 10,000 pounds worth of jewelry, and they learned of that when they found every single piece stashed away in his garage. Shipman had presented many of them as gifts to his wife, then kept the rest as grim trophies of his sickening endeavors. Around this time, Shipman's wife wrote him a letter in which she explicitly asked him to tell her everything he knew. Many have interpreted this as the first signs of Primrose beginning to doubt her husband's innocence, but regardless, the judiciary had the ultimate decision, and they decided that Dr. Harold Shipman was far too dangerous a person to be allowed any prospect of a return to society. Shipman's guilty verdict made him the only doctor in British history to be found guilty of murdering his patients, and the shame associated with that title may well have contributed to a decision that he made in the wee small hours of January 13th, 2004. That morning, one of the guards of Shipman's wing at Wakefield Prison discovered him hanging by a bedsheet from the bars of his window. Medical staff rushed to save his life, but the 57-year-old Shipman was pronounced dead at the scene. The families of his victims stated they felt cheated by his actions, and rightly so. Shipman had never given a full confession, and had never even hinted at the motives for his crimes. Yet, in the opinion of many, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to draw a few parallels between Shipman's murders and one of the definitive experiences of his childhood. During his mother's final days of life, Shipman watched time and time again as a doctor eased her suffering. It's difficult to imagine the kind of relief a young Harold felt in these moments, watching the needle sink into her arm before an expression of bliss came over his mother's face. Maybe it wasn't really Dr. Shipman who killed those women. It was little Harold, who wanted nothing more than to grant those poor old women peace, the same peace that had been granted to his own mother in the days before she died. A memorial garden to Shipman's victims, called the Garden of Tranquility, opened in Hyde Park, Hyde, on July 30th, 2005. At its opening, Tameside counselor Joe Kitchen stated, "A garden like this gives us the chance to say goodbye to our loved ones, which we sadly didn't have the opportunity to do at the time because they were taken away from us by someone who should have known better."